But like every entrepreneur, you kind of have to do the things that don't make sense at the beginning to understand what clicks. And sometimes you got to earn your stripes as an entrepreneur and kind of get punched in the face a few times.
What you're calling luck in this whole situation, some of it too is definitely having the strength of character.
When we lost 90% of our revenue. And that literally happened it seemed like it happened in a day. First thing I realized in my head talking to the management team is we're going to have to lay off literally everybody. At the end of the day, everybody understood at the end of the day.
Yeah. So how come no gray hair? Is it like just for men, or is it like just genetics?
That I can't explain.
Welcome to Money Mavericks, the podcast where we explore the dynamic world of finance, investment, and entrepreneurship.
I'm Kirk Drake.
And I'm Daryl Hicks. Together, we're here to bring you the latest insights, expert opinions from the trailblazers who are redefining success in the financial world. Welcome to another exciting episode of the Money Mavericks podcast. Saroop, super stoked to have you here, man. This is a conversation that Kirk and I have been looking forward to for a while. A lot for us to unpack and get into, and I think the audience will understand pretty quickly why we're really excited about this, because I think some of the topics we're going to talk about are very pertinent and relevant for a lot of founders and capital allocators out there, for institutionally backed businesses and in fintech, but even just some of the dynamics about how all that works. But we really appreciate you making the time to come in and chat with us, buddy.
Thanks for having me, guys, and appreciate you giving me a forum to share my story.
Yeah, can't wait. Speaking of which, would love for you to share with the audience kind of your origin story, what you've been up to for the last little while, the business. I mean, obviously everything to do with AI is super buzzwordy and catchy these days. I love talking to founders that are actually building really cool stuff that's solving real world practical problems for people with these tools, taking it from the academic and the esoteric into the real practical. Would love to kind of hear your story, share it with the group.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. I'll start from very early days. I'm from just outside of Toronto, and my dad was computer science, and he taught me everything I needed to know from early age about technology, and specifically about the power of what code can do. And he introduced me to the personal computer very early on. And I was just one of those kids that was super fascinated with my Commodore 64, took it apart, assembled it back together, right? Tinkered away with that. And back then, I didn't have the foresight to kind of like understand where this was all going. But over the years, especially as I was tinkering away in high school with, creating web pages for my high school and things like that, and as the internet started to emerge, it just became obvious to me that it felt like we had new superpowers. So continued on that path and, went to school for computer science. And it was then in university when I realized that, wow, like the power of data and where this was going is like machine intelligence. It was one of my favorite courses in university was my course on AI. And I actually did a minor in neuropsychology because I was fascinated on how the intersection of the human brain and computer science. And from then on, I've been thinking about like how those two converge. Over the years, I've been working in the banking space, just in Toronto. Like that's what you do. You just go into banking, mainly on working with data and analytics teams on how to leverage data to really, really empower, support staff, sales staff, et cetera. And I was just kind of pulled into this whole world of how to kind of leverage data in better ways. And, I met a group of people that I still work with today, like my co-founder, et cetera, that, we started building ML models within the enterprise. And all of a sudden we're like, this stuff really, really works. And it wasn't until about 2017 where we started Senso, but it was rooted in a background where we had a lot of experience in building these types of models for large scale enterprises and really connecting it with end users. It wasn't only about building models in a lab, it was about commercializing it and operationalizing it so it could be useful for frontline employees. And AI went from really, really expensive and narrow to what we see today, which is like very broadly accessible and inexpensive to deploy really valuable experiences, right? So really, I've been thinking about how to kind of improve the experience over the years. And, when Senso started out, we started doing what we were used to, building ML models for large banks. And we didn't get it fully right the first time. Our first idea didn't pan out. We'll talk about this on this podcast. But like every entrepreneur, you kind of have to do the things that don't make sense at the beginning to understand what clicks. And sometimes you got to earn your stripes as an entrepreneur and kind of get punched in the face a few times. And then those kind of experiences and those struggles kind of like provide the conviction and clarity necessary to really do something impactful. And I feel right now is, the time for my team to gain a lot of really kind of benefits in deploying this technology, because we've gone through the rolling around the mud for a long time in order to get to where we are today. So that's a little bit of background and kind of where I'm from and where we are right now.
What was the problem that you were trying to solve within these banks, and who were you solving it for? The FI, the consumer? Maybe just kind of unpack the first version of the solution, the idea behind it.
Yeah. So in 2017, there was a lot of buzz in Toronto about AI, especially like 2012 was when, the deep learning era really began. Like Toronto and the U of T was the place where, Jeff Hinton, Ilya Sutskever really kind of sparked this wave of deep learning that we're all like capitalizing on today and just like enamored by. So there was a lot of buzz in Toronto. Is in 2017, I had the opportunity to join like a program really spawned out by an organization called Next Canada, called Next AI. It was the first of its kind, but it brought together researchers, industry experts at University of Toronto to kind of build companies, and it enabled entrepreneurs to build companies. And the whole objective was build an AI company, right? And it just surrounded us by like deep researchers. And my co-founder was really an expert in mortgages. He was a data scientist, but he also had a mortgage background. So we decided to build like a market-wide score, which was a predictive score, which predicted when, a bank's customer, a mortgage customer, was going to churn, meaning that they were going to refinance and switch to another bank, or they were going to purchase a home and get poached by another bank. And actually, it worked incredibly well. It was very difficult to operationalize because we had to ingest a lot of data from the bank. We actually partnered with TransUnion Canada to provide us with data to kind of like provide that to the banks. And it was just operationally a very heavy task for a small team of, entrepreneurs and builders to actually deploy, but it worked really, really well in a ZERP environment. Like during COVID, like every bank was like calling on us, and we were successful in operationalizing this across a couple of institutions. The challenge we had is in 2022, when interest rates rose, not many people were refining or purchasing homes. So the market really kind of decided for us that wasn't a relevant product anymore. So all our customers sort of rebudgeted, and we had like literally almost 100% churn within a month because all the banks renew at the same time. And that left us in a position in November 2022. I'll never forget that month. Where we were like, is this business dead? And I had to kind of approach my board with that and everything. Lucky for us, on the same month, ChatGPT launched. And what changed was demand actually was created in the market at scale. Like everybody was talking about AI. And Kirk was one of the first ones that came to me, and he's like, hey, I've been in your position before, like as an entrepreneur. I know how it feels, but I think this is a really important time. And I think the credit union space could be a real opportunity for us to really kind of like do something impactful.
Yeah, one of my favorite situations is, and having been in this myself as an entrepreneur, is when you're down and out and people have written you off, right? Because now the expectations are gone, right? And all the sunk costs are gone. And you can literally go, okay, taking everything I've learned in the past period of time, do I still have the intestinal fortitude to take another swag at this, right? And do I have a great idea based on everything I've learned? And those the entrepreneurs in that mode, those are the guys you want to bet against. Or I'm sorry, bet on, not bet against. You want to bet on them because there is no one better that when they're backed in a corner than an entrepreneur, right? There's no quit. Beyond all rational logic, right? That's where you see that. And so, yeah, it's been very cool to watch that progression and see how fast they were able to take, this set of principles and concepts and ideas and apply it with generative AI.
It's really interesting for me. The self-talk was, when this is happening, I'll paint a bit of a picture for you. There's a lot of stories of founders out there who raised a bunch of capital, were working on a business. All of a sudden, through no fault of their own or otherwise, they end up in a situation where they just have a massive amount of churn. Like you said, essentially 100% churn. I mean, all your revenue's gone with 100% churn. There's a crossroads, right? Like, do we just fold up this shop, fire sale some of the assets, the IP for whatever we can, give the investors back, whatever, however many cents on the dollar we possibly can, do as orderly a wind up as we can, and everybody moves off into the sunset and starts a new business with a fresh cap table and fresh investors versus what it sounds like I think you did, which is, restructure the existing business to go keep the assets and the team and most of the shareholders and kind of pivot into something new. So one, I'd love to understand like which one of those options did you pick and kind of walk us through what you actually did in the details. But importantly, what was going on inside of your mind? Like what was the self-talk and the narrative as you were kind of facing these options?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, November 2022 is when we like pretty much lost like 90% of our recurring revenue. We still had money in the bank, but we also had like, an opportunity to raise a Series A at that time. And of course, you lose 90% of your revenue, your term sheet gets pulled. I didn't realize it at the time, but a lot of other entrepreneurs were going through similar stories. And I only realized that later. But it wasn't until November 2023 that we actually were able to restructure the company. So we went through a year of struggle and pain. It was the most painful, year of my professional career. And, Kirk saw much of kind of what we went through throughout this year. What was going through my head in November 2022 when we lost like, 90% of our revenue. And that literally happened in like, it seemed like it happened in a day. First thing I realized in my head talking to the management team is we're going to have to lay off literally everybody, And so the first conversation was talk to the board, right? And we have a very supportive board. They've been great. And throughout the whole, pivot, they've been amazing, just super supportive, like weekly calls, just supporting me. So I approached the board. That was a very difficult conversation because it's like, man, I just don't want to disappoint the people that invested in me. But very quickly, I was able to get the board together, shared the news, and, we were all in agreement that we had to lay off like pretty much everybody but the two founders. And we did that in 10 days. And that was before like ChatGPT launched in November 30th. So until ChatGPT launched, like literally 20 days later, we thought we were going to shut down the business. When OpenAI launched ChatGPT, and that's just luck. Like I have nothing to attribute it other than timing and luck. And I think that every successful entrepreneur I've spoken to said there's always an element of luck that happens. That was one of the lucky periods for us. But before that, we were literally going to shut down the business. When ChatGPT launched, had a conversation with Chris and Kirk about, there being a real opportunity in the credit union space. And, I told my wife and, my kids, I'm like, December is a month where I'm just going to lock myself in a room with a couple of my remaining team member, my co-founder, and we're going to build something. We're going to build a prototype. And in January, we sort of awakened with something that we can show off to credit unions. And then, Chris and Kurt, like, said, hey, don't even worry about anything with regards to us. We'll put you in front of like credit unions and, just talk to them about what it is that you could offer them. And it was very quickly after like 10, 20 meetings that they set up for us, what the insight was that sort of like we as a team with all of our background and experience, we were the best in the world to solve. And, that's when it started. Like that's when the pivot started.
Yeah, because you had paid your dues and spent a lot of time, energy, work at the universities and building the business, familiar with the AI models and things like that. What was the novel application? Like, all these large language models come out, everyone, all of a sudden, AI has been around for a really long time, like you said, in a very narrow application, but all of a sudden ChatGPT comes out. And because human beings can now talk to it, it becomes a very real, like a very striking sort of moment in our recent history. But what's the application for the credit unions?
Yeah, happy to get into that. And like what ChatGPT's launch actually just what it did is created demand in the market. But like all the way from like 2018, 2019, we were like tracking and reading papers and understanding like how these LLMs were developing. We had early access to GPT-3, so we were like understanding the capabilities. And it became obvious to us in that 2020, 2021 period that, as I said at the beginning of this podcast, AI used to be very expensive and narrow, meaning that the first use case we deployed, which is predicting, when someone's going to churn from a bank's portfolio, it took a lot of resources, a lot of data, and a lot of effort to deploy one very narrow use case for a bank, right? Whereas LLMs, because the very nature of a lot of the unstructured data and text is natural language, once LLMs came to be and we started experimenting with this in like, 2020, 2021, it became obvious that you could do a broader amount of use cases with a lot less capital. And that was the thing we were waiting for, right? And we were ingesting policies, procedures, user guides from the banks. We were kind of like amalgamating that with data beforehand. Our platform was built to do that. So, when ChatGPT launched and when we had to pivot the business, it just made sense to us that, we could leverage our platform in other ways and put LLMs at the center of that, because our platform's really good at just kind of like getting the most out of ML models and machine learning models in the middle. And the use case that was most obvious that we got off like 20 calls with credit unions in the CU2 network was ingest your policies and procedures, standardize it, and allow MSRs on the front line to search for that information so you can reduce member wait time. And very quickly, we were able to deploy that, prototype out to a few credit unions and prove that it really did remarkable things. And that was the beginning of our journey in getting the first 5 credit unions on board. And getting the first 5 credit unions on board, we were strapped for cash, really kind of allowed us to survive, from like that, February, March timeframe to the time when the restructuring happened.
How did you hold creditors at bay? You've got this year of purgatory, right? Like where you're not sure if you're going to make it. You might make it. Sometimes it's looking good. Sometimes you're throwing up your Cheerios, right? How did you manage, all the conflicting interest of investors who are freaking out, lenders who are freaking out, customers who are freaking out in that mode?
Yeah, so I mean, like we raised, close to $5 million, for Senso 1.0. Some of that was convertible debt. Most of it was equity. And, again, it just attributed to luck. We have really amazing shareholders that were supportive throughout the process. A majority of shareholders were, especially our board, were super supportive, and even like our debt holders. I was actually surprised along the way, but of course, there was tough conversations that I had along the way that, like, frankly, like I was very uncomfortable. I think that like those conversations actually helped me build a lot of character. And I don't know whether this is the Canadian in me. I used to avoid tough conversations before. I used to kind of do everything around the tough conversation. And I think that like the year of pain forced me to kind of like always focus on, let's do the hard thing first. And sometimes those were tough conversations, but that kind of gave me like a teaching that, just hit it dead on in the head. And, at the end of the day, everybody understood at the end of the day.
Yeah. So how come no gray hair? Is it like just for men, or is it like just genetics?
That I can't explain. That I got a few gray hairs on my beard, so that's probably it. But that I can't explain.
Like when you got like the full on, dark mullet, like with nothing, like it's impressive.
I Again, like I didn't have any nights where I like cried myself to sleep, but I have a good support system at home. Like there were moments where, we would be like 3 instances throughout the 2023. We almost ran out of money, like literally like the day before we ran out of money, something saved us. We could talk about those 3 instances. And again, like luck had a lot to do with it. Sometimes I feel like there's like some sort of guiding light supporting me on the way that purposely puts me on the edge of the cliff, but saves me at last minute. And I just can't explain that. That's just like so much luck has happened on the way. And I would say that I'm just really lucky to have great people around us, from, Kirk and Chris at CU2, but again, our shareholders, my team, like incredibly supportive. Right. So
one of the things that always, I remember the couple of dark days in my career is how much my wife surprised me in those moments where my self-doubt, where, you have this transfer of support in a crazy, weird way. And the things that you thought attracted them to you were not relevant at all. Right. Like,
yeah.
On Money Mavericks, we don't just talk about making money. We explore the innovative strategies and bold decisions that drive real change. Whether you're an experienced investor, a budding entrepreneur, or just someone looking to make smarter financial choices, we've got something for you.
Every week, we're going to sit down with industry leaders, visionaries, and mavericks who share their journeys, challenges, and breakthroughs, from contrarian views on market trends to the secrets behind building a successful startup. You get an inside look at what it takes to thrive in today's economy.
And we promise to keep it real, engaging, and most importantly, actionable. No jargon, no fluff. Just straightforward conversations that you can apply to your own financial journey.
So get ready to challenge your thinking, expand your knowledge, and take control of your financial future. This is Money Mavericks.
where we turn financial dreams into realities and mavericks into legends.
Yep.
I think
Absolutely.
that can't be overstated. The importance of having a really good support system. If you're fortunate, a really good partner, but definitely really good friends, a good board. And I'm sure, Sarup, that there was a lot of, what you're calling luck in this whole situation. Some of it too is definitely having the strength of character, the integrity to show up and have the hard conversations and tell people point blank what exactly is going on, and to be willing to throw yourself into the fire to get out there and try to fix it, right? And try to say, hey, there's this new opportunity that's opened up, and I think that we can go chase it down. And so the fortitude, the mental fortitude and the emotional fortitude to put your nose to the grindstone and shove it through. Like, this is something Kirk and I were talking about earlier. He's got this fun thesis around founder-led publicly traded companies where he's got an index off of them. And I'd love to see how the index performs, actually, Kirk, and see if you're onto something there. You could be, but there's definitely something about, founders who are willing to just push themselves through just about anything. I mean, what's that old quote that it's a Bay Area VC who originally said it? Elon Musk gets credit for it all the time, that entrepreneurship is like eating glass as you stare
Yeah.
into the abyss.
Yeah. There you go.
I think
It really is.
every founder knows what that feels like.
Yeah, but no one really talks about it. That's why I like what you guys are doing here, because we're actually like sharing stories of like the not just the good times of being an entrepreneur. There are many good times, but look, I mean, as entrepreneurs, we commit ourselves for a decade to get, wins. It's not incremental. Like, it's literally most of the time we're like, crawling through the mud. And we have wins along the way, and those wins are really what keep us going. Going back to this whole topic, right? I stared my biggest fears I had to confront, and I had to like look at it in the face. And the biggest fear as an entrepreneur is you just don't want to let people down. That's number one. You don't want to let yourself down, and you don't want to fail. You don't want to shut down your company. Like, you'll do anything. And sometimes that could be blinding, because it may be the best thing to do to shut down your company. Right. And it could have been that case for me. It ended up working out, and we ended up pivoting to a different idea that was tangential to what we were doing in the past. It was very natural to kind of like pivot from a product perspective and a market perspective. We understood the market, and having Chris and Kirk to guide us in terms of how credit unions think was hugely helpful. But I would say that like, I came out the other side a different person, like an evolved.
Yeah, it's fascinating. The theme of the podcast is the Money Mavericks, and one of the things that we've talked a lot about the really important stuff of the emotional and mental fortitude, the integrity, like growing into the ability to have the really tough conversations, call it like it is. Kirk shared a few details. I'm not going to call them out, and some of the things that you had said to him that really caused him to take a step back and say, okay, Saroop is the guy who's going to push this through, and he's not pulling any punches. And I'm sure that this is not an easy conversation for him, what he's called me up to say, but I appreciate so much the strength and the conviction and the integrity that he's showing in it, that I feel like this is, at the end of the day, early stage investing is almost always more betting on the jockey than betting on the horse, right? So if you've got someone who's, founder product fit, where they've got a lot of experience, expertise, and knowledge, but also that they've got, that they're high integrity and a lot of conviction to what they're doing. That doesn't always work out, but that's certainly, a really important index. But I'd love to kind of unpack a little bit some of the technical stuff. Like, how do you restructure a business at this point? Is there, like, there's terms out there that not a lot of people are familiar with. I mean, I have some experience with cram downs. I believe that was something that happened in your business. If you wouldn't mind just kind of walking through some of what that was from a technical perspective, but even the conversations that you had to have, and how do you approach those?
Yeah. And look, on the integrity side, like, look, I mean, again, like, my personality is like, I want to make everybody happy naturally. And at the end of the day, you run into certain instances where you can't make everyone happy. It's just impossible, because there's so many stakeholders involved, and you got to find the right balance that works. And the challenge that I went through and I had to face was like, I saw a path to actually getting to success, but I had to have conversations with all the stakeholders and seek alignment. And there were many stakeholders involved in this process. Going back to like how the restructuring occurred, I probably like between like the time where we started getting initial traction with, the 5 credit unions that we got as customers last summer, building the initial product, it was still not possible for me to raise capital. It was just not possible. I remember having like, 150 VC meetings, investor meetings, even with angel investors, a lot of them in the US, Toronto, and like none of them would invest in me because the founders didn't own like much of the company anymore. And that in particular is despite like, a lot of other founders I talked to, getting like good traction from an ARR perspective and a growth perspective, that's a common issue that I see a lot in market. Like you just cannot get funded because you simply aren't incentivized. So that's something that we ran into last year. And the one sort of like moment that like the one thing that I did last summer is I threw in a Y Combinator application, not thinking much about it because it's such a competitive program to get into, threw it in and, I don't know what it was, but we got an interview and we got approved. The contingency on going through YC Winter 24, which started in January 2024, earlier this year, was that we had to restructure the company. Like founders needed to own a majority of the company again. We had to kind of like, reduce the debt to near zero. And, there was just some requirements that seemed impossible at the time, but it was really the only option because, we could have kept the business going with the founders owning what they did, but really from an institutional perspective, it would just not been possible to raise capital. We had to essentially, in order to kind of like satisfy YC's requirements to get in, which would capitalize the business, $500,000 was a lot of money at the time for us in order to see this business through and get to where we are today. But we had to have the tough conversation and with our board and our shareholders on essentially topping up the founders. And by the way, my original co-founder left and, we had to put in place a new co-founder, like our head of engineering stepped up to become our CTO. So that was a painful moment. And
Whoa.
Nick, original co-founder, one of the most stand-up guys I've ever met. And he was just so cooperative throughout the process. He'll always be in my good books and an amazing individual that made an impact in my life. So that was, again, luck, right? Just coming across the right co-founder and just him being very supportive towards the restructuring, but also like the board really understanding and the shareholders understanding that there's 2 choices, really kind of like shut down the company, write off, or let's like restructure this thing and, run a pay to play in order to really kind of like just see this business to success. And YC was enough of a brand and enough of an anchor for us to really kind of like just actually execute on a restructuring, which was complicated. There was a lot of like nuances there that, we had to financially engineer and like there was a lot of like, incentives that we had to kind of figure out. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we ended up figuring it out. And again, we found like a small hole that everybody was satisfied with that we could kind of like execute on. And we ended up making it happen before the Christmas break. And that Christmas break was like, wow. Like I was just like, resting and peaceful.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of Money Mavericks. We hope you found it insightful and inspiring.
Don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. And be sure to share this episode with someone who needs to hear it.
Stay connected with us on social media and visit our website for exclusive resources, episode transcripts, and more.
Until next time, keep pushing the boundaries, making smart moves, and turning your financial dreams into realities.
You've been listening to Money Mavericks, where Mavericks become legends.